Thank you, Tony. Tony was playing piano while I was painting this weekend, so it's because of him that it's done so well. I'm Nick Napoli. I'm the Executive Director for the Northeast Regional Ocean Council. I'm also an advisor to Marco. Two of the projects that I work on that are cross-regional that really inform where I'm coming from in terms of what I would like to learn from this panel and this next few days. We work, obviously, Avalon mentioned the portal. That's where we're trying to collect as much baseline information, products to inform a lot of decision making. And the Regional Wildlife Science Collaborative is also a NROC Marco co-hosted project intending to, it's basically all of you that created it, and we're serving you by helping you coordinate marine life research and the availability of data for use in decision making. So from that perspective, that's where I'm coming from, and I'm really excited to introduce this panel and hear from these folks. A few questions that I'll be asking, or specific items I'll be looking for. What's unique about the Mid-Atlantic region? I had a pork roll from Wawa this morning. So what's unique? I'm not a scientist. I live outside Boston. I can't get those up in Boston. I'll be talking about food all day, by the way, just so you know. So what's unique about the Mid-Atlantic region? That's why I came here, being honest. That and I have two teenagers at home. They understand. Anyway, okay, what's unique about the Mid-Atlantic region? How's it changing? And importantly, from the Regional Wildlife Science Collaborative, one thing we're learning is that we're really good at collecting data. We're pretty good at assessments. We're not really that good about making the data available for decision making in a timely manner, and there's a lot of reasons for that. Our data management systems are not up to the task of integrating all the data that folks are collecting. A lot of reasons for data sharing, a lot of good ones, a lot of not so good ones for why people are not able to share their data. So I'll be asking those questions of the panelists. How do we make sure we get your data in the hands of decision makers, and which decision makers should be getting? Maybe somebody who you're not thinking of typically, who might be using your data or might need to use your data to inform their decisions. So I will stop and invite Dr. Glen up here because he told me he was going to be provocative. So I'll start with Dr. Glen. We're going to hear from Sarah Gaichas, and then Dylan third. And at the end, we'll see if you have any questions, or if not, I'm going to ask the questions that I just set up at the beginning. It's Dr. Glen. Thank you.
Should be clicker right there, sir.
Oh, there's a pointer there, too.
Okay.
I was supposed to tell you that.
Oh. Oh, okay, there's my talk.
Here's your pointer.
Okay, oh,
Yep,
very
so
good.
I just shot you in the eye with it.
Oh, that's okay. So first of all, thank you for inviting me here. It's a great pleasure to be at Monmouth. I also want to thank Nick for the whole Carthage and 250 BC vibe here with all the galleys. I really do appreciate that. But I will be talking about changes over the last 12 months and contrasting them with changes over the last 10 years. And it will be a little bit of a head-spinning narrative, so I just want to warn you conceptually, get that conceptual seatbelt on. So for this talk, I'm going to be using data from a lot of different sources from my colleagues at Woods Hole Oceanographic. A big part of what I've been doing the last several years really relates to close interactions with the commercial fishing industry. And Susan Inglis from CFRF and her colleagues have been working with very closely since 2014 on the Shelf Research Fleet. I'll explain what that is a little bit later. I'm very proud to say that I'm a member of the Squid Squad, an informal group that meets every Friday morning at 10 a.m. It's led by Kim Hyde at the Northeast Fisheries Science Center. And we have representatives from 4 to 6 fishing companies every week that discuss the latest conditions. And so we talk about oceanography, we talk about squid physiology, and we talk about general fishing conditions. And that's changed the way I do my science, because I have to be ready for an email, a photograph of a Gulf Stream flounder. What does this mean? It really gives me an immediacy that academia doesn't normally have. And finally, I just want to thank my many friends in the commercial fishing industry. This has been a very difficult year financially, as I'll get to, in the commercial fishing industry. And I share the anguish of the people that are going through the consequences of some of these recent changes. So,
You did that for effect.
all right. It was the word anguish. That's what set it off.
There might be anguish on one of these walls, I'm not sure.
All right. I think we're good now. Okay. So very quick outline. I'll give a review of the regional circulation and hydrography, so kind of an oceanography 101 of the region. I will answer Nick's question about what's unique later. I'll talk about warming trends and the impacts on stratification. And one of the big surprises of the last 10 years is how much changes in the Gulf Stream have affected the continental shelf. It's really kind of surprising. It was a story that we didn't expect. And the bulk of the talk is what's happened since August 2023, which has just really, really been surprising. And I wouldn't know anything about it if it wasn't for the close contacts with the commercial fishing industry. And then the $64,000 question is what's ahead oceanographically there. And I'll compare the changes in the last year with historical changes there. Okay. Let's see. Oh, it's not advancing for some reason. Okay, phew. Okay, so these are two little cartoons that give the gist of the physical oceanography of the region. So I'm a physical oceanographer. My research really concentrates on processes at the edge of the continental shelf where there's a real concentration of fishing activity. So there are two major current systems in the Northeast. And one of them is the Gulf Stream, which is a western boundary current there. And that's a broad current that carries a lot of heat from the subtropics up into the North Atlantic there. But there's a second important current system, the shelf break jet, that carries cold fresh water down from Labrador. And that goes all the way down to Cape Hatteras, where that water is entrained into the north wall of the Gulf Stream. The Gulf Stream primarily affects the continental shelf by forming eddies that are called warm core rings, and they rotate in a clockwise direction. And the warm core rings are anywhere from 500 meters to 1,000 meters thick, so they can't get on the continental shelf, but they strongly affect the shelf break jet there. On the right-hand side is a climatology during the summer. The upper panel is temperature, and there's a very important water mass called the cold pool. And that's the remnant of the winter-cooled water. During the spring and summer, warming affects the surface layer. And this is one of the remarkable things about the Middle Atlantic Bight, is that it has the largest seasonal changes in temperature in the world there, actually. So the seasonal cycle is very, very important in this region. And that cold pool water mass is important because it keeps organisms from the north, cold water organisms, extending normally all the way down to Cape Hatteras. And there's a huge faunal boundary at Cape Hatteras. In the lower right panel is the salinity, and the water on the continental shelf is much fresher than the water on the continental slope, usually about 2 practical salinity units fresher there. And the temperature salinity characteristics are coincident. Basically, where the salinity gradients are cross shelf, that's also where the temperature gradients are there. Okay, so here's a cartoon that pretty much summarizes my career here. So I'm always careful not to delete this figure. And so this is a two-dimensional plan view. And there are two things that are fundamental to the working of the ecosystem. So the first is the shelf break jet. And you can see that that is the ice attacks there. The jet is surface trapped. It's generally around half a knot. It's a significant feature. But associated with the jet is persistent upwelling that goes from the bottom into the core of the jet. And that upwelling is typically 10 to 20 meters a day. But when warm core rings come in close proximity to the jet, it can be 100 meters a day. So it is capable of taking regenerated nutrients from the bottom and getting it right into the euphotic zone there. And so some of the time you do see a real chlorophyll enhancement in near the surface outcrop of the front there. In addition, a lot of my research has focused on shelf break exchange processes, and that's how water from the deep ocean gets onto the continental shelf, and that results in the tropicalization of the continental shelf, where we're getting more tropical species there in the middle Atlantic Bight. But it's also the export of shelf water that's important too. The shelf water can also go offshore onto the continental slope. And we will see in 2023, 2024, that occurred with a vengeance there. Okay, so I've been working for about 10 years now, very closely with the Commercial Fisheries Research Foundation. And I was involved with the design of the National Science Foundation Ocean Observatories Initiative Pioneer Array. And as a result of multi-use conflict negotiations, I got in touch with Peg Parker, who was the head of CFRF at the time. And about 6 months after some very tough negotiations there, we had an opportunity to write a proposal to the MacArthur Foundation to give the fishing community in Rhode Island 3 sensors to measure salinity and temperature there. And in that map on the left there, we divided the continental shelf into 6 different zones there, and we've collected over 900 profiles in the last 10 years. And the shelf research fleet went out during the pandemic when federal research vessels were not allowed to go out. The fishing industry didn't miss a day out there. And so that data has been very important. A very significant aspect of the shelf research fleet is twice a year I go and give an oceanographic update over at the Commercial Fisheries Center in Rhode Island there, and I get asked all sorts of questions. I explain what the data is saying. I tell an oceanography story. And what's been remarkable about it, through that sustained interaction, I've learned about the fishing practices, and they've learned about the ocean processes. And it's been very consequential. The fishers who actually take the profiles, they use those profiles. They can now interpret what ocean processes they're seeing and are making decisions about where and when to fish based on these profiles. And I'm very proud of that. It takes sustained interaction. It's taken a lot of lunches at good seafood restaurants over the years to really advance it, which I have not minded. Let's see. Okay. So now changes over the last 20 years or so. So climate change has led to ocean warming in the North Atlantic, and it's been pretty pronounced in our region. And Andy Pershing had that paper in 2015 saying that the Gulf of Maine, New England region was in the top 1% of ocean warming. I think we're comparable to the polar regions in terms of rates. And so these two figures are taken from a paper in 2021 by Hendrik Grosser-Lindemann. On the left is a spatial map of warming rates in the region. And this is from, I think, 1980 to 2020 there, around that time. It's 30 or 40 years. But I just want to point out that you can see two main local maxima. One of them is on the continental slope off of George's Bank there. That's where the warm core rings tend to stick there. So the warm core rings have played a role in the spatial distribution of the warming rates. And then surprisingly, along the core of the Gulf Stream as it separates from Cape Hatteras is another local maximum there. Now, another important process that you've probably heard about are marine heat waves. I don't want to go into detail about that, except to say that since 2010, both the intensity and the duration of marine heat waves have increased in the region. Now, one of my colleagues that I work very closely with, and who was also a member of the Squid Squad, is Avijit Gangopillai at the University of Massachusetts, Dartmouth. And I worked very closely with his students. And since about 2017, Vijit's students have been taking Gulf Stream analysis charts from Jennifer Clark. And she's been doing these analysis charts since, I believe, the late 1970s there. And they use GIS systems to actually quantify the area of the rings, their birth time and demise, and their trajectory there. And that's been incredibly useful because there's a number of species like short-fin squid where we think that the warm core ring transport across the continental slope plays a very important role. Okay, so now the changes over the last 20 years. Avijit and I were looking at the year-to-year differences there, and something just jumped out at us as we were looking from 1980 to 2019 there, and that is that there was a big regime shift in the year 2000. And the number of warm core rings that formed jumped from 18 per year to 33 per year. It nearly doubled. And one of Avijit's students, Adrian Silver, actually wrote a paper looking at the heat transport by that increased number of warm core rings. The amount of poleward heat transport in the Gulf Stream prior to 2000, 7% of that went into the slope region after 2000. That's a significant amount of heat. I think that that's a big reason why we've seen tropicalization of the continental shelf. Okay, so now the cold, fresh pulse of 2023-2024. This is where things get interesting and really are a big turnabout relative to the past 20 years. The first week of November 2023, my student Lucas Tanzer was co-chief scientist on a student-led cruise on the Neil Armstrong, the Woods Hole ship. And they did 2 hydrographic transects across the continental shelf. And they noticed that it was very fresh out there. And being an energetic graduate student, Lucas came back and looked at the NASA surface salinity fields from the SMAP product. And the red dashed line is where the 34.5 isohaline, which normally marks the position of the shelf break front, is. The blue dashed line is the 10-year average of that position from the SMAP. And you can see that that red dashed line is significantly further offshore there. It's running about halfway from the shelf break to the north wall of the Gulf Stream. So in March of this year, Lucas actually gave a talk in our departmental seminar series, and I was talking to the fellow in the office next to mine, Robert Todd, and he said, gosh, if there's a lot of fresh water out there, you should really look at my latest glider transect from last week. And so you can see in the far left panel the track of Robert's gliders. For 10 years, he's been running gliders from Miami up to Woods Hole. And in that central panel, the dark blue there is salinity under 34, which is shelf water. His glider was showing shelf water extending all the way from the shelf break to the north wall of the Gulf Stream. This was a big shock to me. Occasionally you see this around the eastern edge of a warm core ring where it pulls the water offshore. It's a 50-meter layer thick with salinities as low as 33, which is a typical cold pool salinity there. So this really got my attention. So in early May, I gave a talk at the Commercial Fisheries Research Foundation, one of the oceanographic updates there. And so my engineer that I work with, Frank Barr, who's been working with the shelf fleet data since 2014, he routinely makes these plots that show the monthly average of all 6 zones there. So this is 10 years worth of data. And this is salinity. And you can see where the orange and the bright red is. That's when warm core rings come close by. And even in zone 1 at the very top, you can see that light blue where there's salty water occasionally getting really pretty far inshore to the 30-meter isobath. However, in the second half of 2023, there was what I called the wall of blue there. There really were no intrusions, no warm core rings. The shelf was really filled with relatively fresh water. So I went back to Avijit and said, well, what's going on in 2023? How are things different? You know, it's just very cold. We're not getting these intrusions. So he had his students work up the number of rings. In 2023, there were only 18 warm core rings formed. And again, that 20-year average was 33. And so the last year with as few as 18 was 1995 there. So, you know, we're going back to conditions of about 20 years ago. The figure that really put the whole thing in context to me was in mid-May during a Squid Squad call. And Kim Hyde and Sarah Salawa present these plots every Friday morning. And I just want you to concentrate first on the 2 on the left. So the top left is 1 week average sea surface temperature from May 13th to 19th. So you can see the dark red is the Gulf Stream there. The blue is the shelf water. There is a warm core ring out there. But the lower left figure is the key, which is the anomaly relative to 30 years. The entire continental slope is purple. Bright purple is 5 degrees centigrade or 9 degrees Fahrenheit. The lighter purple is 3 degrees centigrade or 5 degrees Fahrenheit. Those are huge differences in terms of organisms. Fish can be sensitive to 1 degree centigrade right there. So this was over the entire continental slope. Okay, so coincidentally in early June, my colleague Magdalena Andres had to do some work off of Cape Hatteras, and she said, we're going to do a long transit. Glen, I invited 8 students to go along. Can you be the student wrangler? And I said, oh, sure. I like student wrangling, actually. It was a very interesting time period in May and June because we were hearing about all the financial distress of the fishing industry. So we had started hearing in March from fishers in Cape May that many of the species were showing up 4 to 5 weeks late. And the squid had not shown up yet, particularly the short fin squid that people normally catch at the shelf break right there. And there was one feature, it's called a Gulf Stream shingle, that we were going to cut across there. And I thought that this might be, because short fin squid generally go from the Gulf Stream to the shelf break, I thought that this would be a good opportunity to see if the squid was out there. And I was in touch with 4 separate owners of fishing companies in the Northeast because they were very anxious about whether or not the squid would appear. So I'll show 2 vertical profiles from this cruise where those 2 stars are. So I was expecting surface salinities of 36 because that's supposed to be Gulf Stream water for the shingle and 35 over the continental slope. It turns out that in the shingle, the surface salinity was 33.5. Again, a continental shelf typical salinity there. This confirms what Lucas had seen in the the satellite data that we had all this shelf water that was out over the continental slope. The temperature was 22 degrees C. That's a decent Gulf Stream temperature. And the other profile of salinity on the left here was even fresher, 32.5. So I about fell out of my lab stool when I saw that. It is just remarkable how much fresh water was over the slope. So my student Lucas actually, when he gave his presentation on that cruise, he calculated that it would take 150 cubic kilometers of fresh water to freshen to the level that he saw. However, when we were out there in June, it was probably twice as far offshore. So I would say it's probably on the order of 300 cubic kilometers of fresh water came into our system there. So a natural question is the timing. And so Lucas went back to the SMAP sensor, and this is a Havmuller plot along 71 degrees west where his original hydrographic line was. That's also where the LTER line that Heidi Sosik runs quarterly is there. And I just want to draw your attention to the middle panel. So the blue are fresh anomalies there, and the darkest blue is 1.5 practical salinity units. You can see that in late August 2023, there was about a 1.5 PSU fresh anomaly that came in at the shelf break. We would expect signals from the north to appear first at the shelf break because of that shelf break jet. And there was a second pulse in April there, which kind of explains why we saw such crazy conditions there in both Kim's anomaly plots and then what Magdalena and I saw on the cruise there. And so, again, it's the scale of this that has just been remarkable to me. So in talking to the fishing community, shortfin squid didn't appear until late July, early August. It normally appears in early May. And I happened to give a talk, actually the day after we got in from that Ravel cruise to Woods Hole. I drove down to Cape May and gave a talk to 18 NOAA Infish interns there. And Wayne Reichel, the owner of Lund's Fishery, he was taking the interns on a tour. We were standing in front of the fishing vessel Durston, the squid vessel, and he said, "The guys on the boat are paid by catch there. And we have not been catching squid. They have not had a paycheck in 4 months." And that was just very sobering to me. Since that time period, I've been trying to spread the message of these financial impacts of the fishing industry as much as I can at meetings there. So the folks from the Gulf of Maine Research Institute have looked at their data inside the Gulf of Maine. And there was a short, like 2-page paper with one figure that came out about 2 months ago. There's the SST from December to March on the left that shows the Gulf of Maine is colder. On the right is the temperature and salinity characteristics. 2024, as you can see, is on the far left side there. It's very fresh, 34.2. In red is 2010 to 2023, so you can see how big of a change this is. So now the $64,000 question, the magnitude of these changes. If you go back in the oceanographic literature, there's 2 papers by John Loader about the transition from the warm 1950s to the cold 1960s. And it's that same magnitude there, 3 to 5 degrees centigrade there. So it's been difficult for me when I've been speaking to roomfuls of fishers here. I don't know if this is a decadal shift now. The spatial pattern is very similar. The magnitude was the greatest along the shelf break there. However, we did an experiment in late August, and the salinity seemed to get back to normal in Nantucket shoals. So if I had to guess right now, I think it might be a one-time pulse there. But one of the consequences out of all this, I talked to a fisher from Cape May, Bill Bright, who said, "I was steaming in February over a 6-mile long school of mackerel and I had no permits for it. Because the water was so cold, herring and mackerel came in abundance, but the permit system has been adapted to the warm conditions of the past 10 or 20 years. So there's clearly going to have to be some consideration about the permits, and John Papalardo told me that there's an emergency meeting, I think it's the New England Fisheries Management Council, to talk about the permits this fall there. So the conclusions are, despite this long-term warming trend, there was a significant cooling event that occurred since August of 2023. It also messed up the whale seasonal movements, and there were 50 right whales that just hung out at Hudson Canyon. I don't know if they're still there or not. I haven't been tracking them over the past month or so. But the right whales really kind of dilly-dallied heading north, and I think it was because there was lots of food coming down from that cold, fresh water there. The pulse also was very fresh, 1 to 1.5 PSU, and this extended from the beach to the north wall of the Gulf Stream. I have not seen anything like that in the 40 years I've been out there. And it's interesting, there was 2 different pulses, the first one at the shelf break, the second primarily over the slope. And again, this has had really, really severe financial consequences to the commercial fishing industry there. For example, black sea bass never appeared this summer south of New England. Some of these warmer species that have been moving north just did not appear this year there. And so again, it forces us to really think about the management system and the magnitude of the changes and how rapidly these changes can occur there. So I'll stop there.
Thank you, Glenn. While we're transitioning, you just made a point for me you just supported my point very well of we need our information to get into the hands of decision makers immediately. And thank you for doing this. We need biological data, oceanographic data to get in the hands of decision makers faster than it is. We need to address that. And thank you for your prediction of this just being a pulse. As I told you, I'm an expert in food. All I can predict is I'm going to have a slice of pizza today. So thank you for your expertise.
And one general comment here. I've been talking with my graduate students and my postdocs about what I now call narrative oceanography. And it's the communication skill of taking your very specific, detailed science results and being able to turn it into a story that you can relate to decision makers so that they can take actionable steps afterwards there. And that's something that I really try and beat into my, well, no, maybe that's a bad expression. I try and gently nudge my graduate students and postdocs towards.
Thank you. Sarah, are you there?
Yes, can you hear me?
I can. And you're managing your presentation, right?
Yeah, if that's okay.
Go.
I think I've just shared my screen. It looks like that's working.
Okay, go for it. Thank you.
All right, thank you so much. And thank you for arranging to let me speak remotely. I'm going to leave my camera off because I just got a warning about an unstable internet connection even though I'm in the office. So we'll do our best here. But anyway, thank you very much. So I've been asked to give you a quick overview of the state of the ecosystem, although I think Glenn just did an excellent job of that. What I'm going to talk about is some of the reporting that we do for the fishery management councils, because I do think bringing them these broader messages, like Glenn was just saying, is really important. So we have been reporting on the state of the ecosystem, and you'll see the acronym SOE here for the past several years, since about 2016. And that little QR code there, you should be able to get to the Mid-Atlantic 2024 report from that. So I'll start off by saying what Glenn just showed you, a lot of that's going to go in the 2025 report that we are just spinning up right now, and the report you're seeing here was presented in April to our fishery management councils. But the idea here is to try to bring them some of this ecosystem context as they go through and they're looking at managing species by species. It's also really big changes we've had in our ecosystem. So the idea of these reports are really to link the ecosystem indicators to management objectives in the fishery. These are contextual reports, and they're kind of a subset of like a many 100-page ecosystem status report. They're meant to really focus on fishery objectives. We use open science philosophy to produce these reports, and so everyone can get all of the data that we use here. And we try to keep everything very transparent. All the methods are online. We have a lot of online information. Those will be linked at the end of the talk. And right now, the Mid-Atlantic Fishery Management Council is using this report and a lot of these indicators in their ecosystem approach process. So there's been a risk assessment, conceptual modeling, and management strategy evaluation done based on a lot of the indicators in these reports. So just to give you a quick overview of the structure of the report, so you can kind of see how we lay these things out. They start off with a graphical summary that's intended to communicate basically all of the content, and I'm going to be giving you that big overview in this talk, so don't worry, you shouldn't have to read those tiny pages right there. It's kind of like first a report card with respect to objectives, and you can see ecosystem scale fishery management objectives on the right-hand side of your screen. So there's things listed in federal fishery legislation, the Magnuson-Stevens Act, that include providing the maximum benefit to the nation in terms of seafood production, recreational opportunities. There's also, obviously, economics are very important, stability, social and cultural values, and we have many laws governing protected species in the United States. There's a lot of services, the ecosystem services, that are kind of supporting and regulating too. So we try to report on those, including biomass productivity, trophic structure, and habitat. So the first section looks at the objectives. The second section looks at risks to meeting those management objectives, and many of those are these climate and ecosystem risks that Glen was just talking about, and also the fishery management councils are very interested in how offshore wind development will interact with their management system, so we try to report on that. The ecosystem scale in the report is pretty important, so Glen just showed you some really nice maps of the full shelf. We produced two reports, one for the Mid-Atlantic Fishery Management Council that emphasizes the lighter blue portion of the map that you see here, and one for the New England Fishery Management Council that emphasizes the darker blue portions, the Gulf of Maine and Georges Bank. However, we do have some coast-wide indicators. All of these red links here, everyone can have these slides if they want, linked to our online glossaries, technical methods, indicator data, and the indicator catalog describing a lot of the indicators, so that's all available. And just to orient you to the figures a little bit, what you're seeing on the right-hand side of the slide there is a long shelf distance of the center of basically all of the fish species on our bottom trawl surveys. So the time series figures obviously have time on the x-axis and the indicator on the y. The black dots and lines are the observations, and then if you see an orange line, that means there's a significant increase over time, and if you see a purple line, that means there's a significant decrease over time. We don't tend to we don't estimate these for less than a 30-year time series right now based on some work that was done recently. And then also to orient you to the scale of the figures, that last gray band on the end of the figure, that is the most recent 10 years of the time series, just so you can see what's happening a bit more recently. So with that, I'm going to give you the overview of performance in the Mid-Atlantic ecosystem. So, and then I will walk you through in more detail the very first one of these. But basically, in the Mid-Atlantic, over the long term, we have seen declines in seafood production and profits, and both of those are below the long-term average right now in the fisheries. So just like Glen was saying, these are important things to monitor. Recreational opportunities are kind of a mixed bag. The recreational effort is up, but the effort diversity of the recreational fishery is actually down over the long term. For stability indicators, we do see kind of a mixed bag. The fishery is relatively stable recently, and there's some suggestions of changes in ecological diversity and stability. And we look at social and cultural status rather than trends, looking at fishing engagement and reliance by community, as well as environmental justice, vulnerability by community. And for protected species, there's two main objectives. One is maintaining bycatch below thresholds for harbor porpoise and gray seals, and those objectives are currently being met, even though bycatch trends are different, largely based on the trends in the populations. And then obviously recovering endangered populations. So the North Atlantic right whale, as we all know, has been on decline recently and is below the recovery target at the moment. So that's performance relative to management objectives. When we look at the risks to meeting those fishery management objectives, objectives. We've recently revised this. Instead of sort of reporting a bunch of time series of temperature, which are all increasing and are actually quite, scary if you want your systems to be stable, we've turned to reporting these with respect to management objectives. So we look at the climate risks to spatial and seasonal management and to quota setting and rebuilding. And the overall summary here is that we are seeing multiple species distribution shifts across fish and protected species. This year we'll also be looking at zooplankton. We're seeing changing spawning and migration timing, just like Glen was talking about, and we're seeing multiple stocks that have poor condition and declining productivity, although there are others that are doing well. For other ocean uses, offshore wind development, there's a lot of revenue in the proposed wind areas that can range from 1 to 23% by individual ports, and some of those ports do have environmental justice concerns for the population as a whole, and up to 20% of the revenue by managed species in the Mid-Atlantic has been taken from the proposed wind areas over the last 12 years. There's also overlap with important right whale foraging habitats and potentially increased vessel strike and noise risks. So that's kind of the overview of the first two sections. Last year we started a new section called the highlights, and this is the section that reflects some of what Glen was talking about, and we'll also be talking about that again next year. So thank you, Glen, for giving us a preview of what this section will say for 2025. But the notable events in 2023 included that we did actually start construction on some of those offshore wind areas. There was a die-off of Atlantic sea scallops in the elephant trunk region in the Mid-Atlantic between 2022 and 2023. Hypoxia and mortality events were observed in the New Jersey coastal ocean over the summer of 2023. But there was record low hypoxia in Chesapeake Bay, so we really do need to look at multiple scales. In the Gulf of Maine in 2023, there was a gigantic summer phytoplankton bloom, and you're seeing that in the over here on the right-hand side of the screen, the large red blob in the upper left figure there. So that was unprecedented, and there was also the second-ranked Gulf of Maine bottom heat wave. There was warm water everywhere, like Glen said, except on the northeast U.S. shelf. So we did see that cooling and noted it, and there are big changes in the Gulf Stream, including the fewer number of rings that Glen noted. It was an El Nino year. It was the warmest year on record globally. Again, I said somewhat flippantly, but we do keep seeing this increase in temperature. So a decrease on the shelf, as Glen just reported, is actually pretty big news. So, I'll just walk you through a couple of these as an example to see how the indicators interact. So for the first section, we'll go through seafood production, and we look at indicators of commercial landings as well as recreational harvest, and you can see all the purple points there where they've been going down over time. And so the question is why, and we try to walk through some hypotheses of why that might be. So it could be changes through system production, in management actions, market conditions, or environmental change. So in the Mid-Atlantic, the indicators of stock status are showing that almost the Mid-Atlantic stocks are actually in good shape. So they're in the lower right-hand corner of left-hand figure, except for two stocks in mackerel and fluke, summerflown, which are both have status that isn't where we want those stocks to be. But overall, it's health status that's driving those decreases, and is it changing management? So what we see on the right-hand side is the total allowable catch in the region. That's been relatively stable over time. See, the catch has been achieved. That's that bottom right-hand slide there. We also see that if anything, we see some increases in biomass in the system for things like piscivores in the spring. And so it's probably the biomass drive, but when you look over here on the right hand, you see are the lines and landings tend to be in both fishery related. So the planktivore decline is actually consolidation of the menhaden fleet over the last 20 years or so. And the benthos decline is probably more linked to market conditions, but we still want to keep an eye on some of these ecosystem risks. And I'll walk you through one example of that next really quickly here at the end. So I'll walk you through the risks to spatial management. So councils do manage not just sort of quotas, but also where and when people can fish. And so understanding how the fish are redistributing and other resources are redistributing in time is really important. You've already seen this indicator on the left-hand side. That is that most of our fish species in aggregate are actually moving to the northeast and into deeper water over the past several decades. You can see over on the right-hand side that some cetaceans are also following that, but there are some moving in the opposite direction, and it depends on the season. So this kind of more granular look is what we're going to be taking more of this year. Why might this be happening? Again, we try to use other indicators to explain some of these dynamics. So what you're seeing, and apologies, we are still resorting to a lot of time series here, but what you're seeing on the left-hand side at the top are the center of distribution of aggregate forage fish species in the system, and in general, that has been more northeastward overall. And so we are seeing forage species move, which could drive some of the managed species to follow them. We're also seeing this, obviously, long-term increase in sea surface temperature. So warming can cause things to shift. And we are seeing changes in the ocean habitat, like Glen explained very well. So the Gulf Stream Index, that's the north wall of the Gulf Stream, has been moving north over time, although we are seeing this drop in the most recent year. And these are cold pool indices, so the cold pool has been getting warmer over time, as well as smaller over time. And so these are all really important, and we'll see what happens with this year's update. We mentioned the hypoxia and ocean acidification off of New Jersey. This is from some glider transects that we're including, but also the record low hypoxia in Chesapeake Bay because of the relatively cool summer and high salinity. So that's actually good news for a lot of managed species and their larval and juvenile habitat. The sea scallop recruitment that was detected in spring of 2022 looked pretty good in the boxed area in the map on your right there. But by 2023 spring, those were gone. And so what we're showing over here on the right-hand side is a new approach to expressing temperature. This is bottom temperature in scallop habitat. This is the number of days that it was over the stressful level for Atlantic sea scallops. And so this light green here inside this box, which does mark the elephant trunk management area, showed that for more than a month, the temperatures were above that level. So this is getting a little bit more at not just temperature, but the direct temperature links to some of our important managed species. So to summarize, what we're trying to communicate here is that there's a lot to pay attention to, that we can't just leave our management actions running. We need to be able to align the fisheries availability and biological processes and evaluate whether our previous assumptions are still holding about spatial distribution and seasonal timing. There's a real risk that some of our short-term predictions may not work if we're assuming the same underlying conditions, because we're really seeing big changes in conditions. Now, these are evaluated in each of the assessments, so obviously we need to keep doing that. We are seeing some system-wide productivity shifts of multiple managed stocks, and I didn't show you those indicators directly, but we do need to keep looking into whether these are regime shifts or ecosystem reorganization and how we should think about that in management. That's not something we're really set up to do. And we are getting near-term oceanographic forecasts coming online soon. So we're testing those right now, and we're very interested in being able to show those to managers and see how that might help people. And so there's a couple of links here too about some large initiatives. The East Coast Climate Scenario Planning Initiative is coordinating across multiple councils and management bodies, and there are people trying to predict distribution shifts. So I want to just put up a slide that shows how many people contribute to these reports, very many, and I want to leave you with some references and links to our resources. And thank you so much.
Thank you, Sarah. We have one other presenter. Sarah, are you staying on for a little bit in case we have questions?
Yes,
Okay.
Yes.
Okay, thank you. And we're running a little long, but I think the next after this is a 15-minute break, and you all don't need a break just yet. We'll have lunch soon. That's your call? Break as you will. The next presentation will be from Dr. Dylan Sinnickson from Stony Brook.
Great. Hi, everyone. My name is Dr. Dylan Sinnickson. I'm a senior postdoctoral associate at Stony Brook University, and today I will be presenting upon the New York Bight Ocean Indicators Report project. Just for a preface, I know a couple of our previous presentations have been discussing a lot of the results out of 2024, but most of these results will be over the last several decades up till 2023. Currently, the 2024 report is under preliminary development. So I want to give some project overview of the Indicators Report project. This is a collaborative effort between Stony Brook University and New York DEC. It's a comprehensive ecosystem assessment of the New York Bight region. And this is a region of significant scientific and management importance due to the rapid warming of the marine environment, the high coastal population densities, and the important commercial and recreational fisheries in this area. Currently, the project includes 39 different indicators, which include 14 abiotic factors, 18 biological indicators, and 7 human-focused indicators, with 3 indicators currently under preliminary development. So now I'll discuss our sampling methodologies. We use a variety of different data sources that are used to inform these indicator analyses. We have extensive internal data collection protocols, the first of which is our glider deployments. This is a way that we can assess both the volume and the duration of the cold pool. And we're also able to collect a variety of different physical oceanographic characteristics. We also use the research vessel out of Stony Brook called the Seawolf, which conducts zooplankton tows. It collects data on ocean acidification, as well as marine bottom temperatures. And lastly, we have our marine mammal drone imagery program, where we're able to collect drone imagery of humpback whales in order to determine their overall body condition. And in addition to our internal data collection protocols, we also use data from external sources, primarily from NOAA. The first of which is the EcoMon monitoring program, which is a long-term ecological monitoring program that collects data on zooplankton densities. We also use the NOAA bottom trawl survey, which collects data on large-bodied fishes as well as shellfish. And lastly, we use the MRIP program, which collects data on recreational fishing effort. So now we'll move on to the results of our indicator analyses. We'll start off with the physical indicators, the first of which is sea surface temperatures. So you can see on this figure on the right-hand side, we have the seasonal mean sea surface temperature in each of our 4 months. So the major takeaway from these plots is that in all seasons, we're seeing an increase in long-term trends in sea surface temperatures. So you see these time series extend approximately 40 years, and in all seasons, we're seeing an increase in sea surface temperatures approximately 2 degrees Celsius. With respect to summer sea surface temperatures, they have stabilized over the last 5 years at approximately 23 degrees Celsius. But the major takeaway here is that we are seeing important, significant increases in sea surface temperatures. With respect to the cold pool, I know we touched on it earlier, but if you're not familiar, the cold pool is an important physical oceanographic characteristic of the mid-Atlantic Bight region. It's generally constituted by cooler waters, and we assess the volume of the cold pool through the Stony Brook glider deployments. And so you can see on this figure on the right-hand side, we have the volume of the cold pool in each of our 4 summer months, June, July, August, and September. And the major takeaway from these plots is that there's a long-term decreasing trend in the volume of the cold pool. Now we'll move on to discussing the 20-degree isotherm. This is an important ecological and oceanographic characteristic that often divides more northern associated species versus more warm water southerly species. So you can see that over the last several decades, we've seen a significant change in the location of this 20-degree isotherm. So as we can look in the 1980s, that light green isotherm is generally located about 40 degrees north latitude, but over the last several decades, it now has shifted to 41 degrees north latitude, which is located at approximately Montauk and Martha's Vineyard. So that's been a northeastern shift of over 100 kilometers over just several decades. And the 20-degree isotherm is an important thermal maximum threshold for American lobsters. As I'm sure you all know, that's an important commercial fishery in this area. And lobsters generally prefer cooler waters. So they generally have higher mortality and decreased recruitment when in warmer temperatures. So this decrease in the proximity of cooler, abundant waters is a likely cause of the population decrease in the New York Bight. Essentially, the waters are too warm for effective recruitment and survivorship of American lobsters. So now we'll discuss in a little bit more detail the trends in lobster biomass. So this plot on the right-hand side are informed by the NOAA bottom trawl survey. If you're not familiar, they sample in two different seasons. We have spring and fall sampling seasons. So the major takeaway from these plots is that we've seen a significant decrease in lobster biomass in both spring and fall seasons, with the decrease a little bit more evident in the fall seasons. And that isn't surprising because lobsters generally prefer cooler temperatures. Marine temperatures tend to be warmer than in the spring, so they tend to be more sensitive to changes in the fall. With respect to our overall fish community assemblage, this plot on the right-hand side describes the ratio of northern to southern species in the NOAA bottom trawl survey. So this is going to be an indicator of climate change and habitat shifts. Overall, we've seen limited changes in the spring, but we have seen significant decreases in this northern to southern species ratio in the fall since the 1970s. So that's going to indicate that we have less northern species and more southern species, which is going to be indicative of significant climate change implications and habitat shifts in the mid-Atlantic Bight. With respect to overall fish species richness and biodiversity, again, these data were informed by the NOAA bottom trawl survey, and we have seen greater diversity in both spring and fall sampling seasons. And that can be indicative of something that I touched on in the previous slide, where we have a tropicalization, where more equatorial species are moving into the temperate marine environment, and that does have the potential to enhance biodiversity in this region. Another important indicator of climate change is abundances of black sea bass. If you're not familiar, black sea bass traditionally have been associated more with the southerly states of the mid-Atlantic, maybe the Carolinas and Virginia, but now we're seeing them in greater densities in southern New England. Again, these data were informed by the NOAA bottom trawl survey, and we've seen a significant increase in black sea bass populations in both the spring and fall sampling seasons. And if you focus your attention to the fall sampling season, we actually see an exponential population growth of black sea bass going back to the year 2000. So a pretty dramatic increase in the populations of this commercially important fishery. This slide is going to indicate marine mammal strandings for more cold water or warm water odontocetes. So this is going to be another indicator of climate change. The major takeaway from this plot is that we see a significant linear decrease in the proportion of stranding events. For odontocetes, those are going to be toothed whales, for more cold water species, whereas for the warm water related species, we actually see a significant linear increase in the proportion of strandings in the New York Bight region. This is an indicator that I touched on earlier. This is from our marine mammal drone imagery program. So we essentially put out drones to assess the lengths and widths of humpback whales in order to assess their overall body condition. So if you look at the figure on the left-hand side, those are violin plots that describe the body condition of humpback whales in the New York Bight. That's the red plot. Well, you can see that whales in this region tend to have a little bit poorer body condition, particularly when you compare that to whales in the Gulf of Maine, which is an adjacent feeding ground where whales are particularly well fed in that area. And now moving on to our human indicators. Human population growth, obviously that's a very important factor determining marine ecological health. We've seen that the human population on Long Island has increased significantly over the last half century, but populations have decreased since 2020. With respect to vessel container traffic, this plot describes total vessel container traffic out of the ports of New York and New Jersey. This is going to be have important implications for marine mammals, vessel strikes, and anthropogenic mortality. So we have seen a significant increase in vessel traffic out of the ports of New York and New Jersey over the last several decades, which can have the potential to have negative interactions with marine mammals. So just to finish with some conclusions, the major takeaway is we have seen this continued warming trend. There's been a decrease in the size of the cold pool. There's been a northward shift of that 20-degree isotherm. Again, that's an important feature for American lobsters. We've seen changes in the fish community assemblage. We've seen greater occupancy of more warm water species. We've seen an increase in black sea bass populations, and we've seen a decrease in lobster biomass and overall suitable habitat. And lastly, we've seen changes in our human indicators. We've seen a decrease in the human population since 2020, and we've seen an increase in marine commercial traffic, which does have marine mammal implications through vessel strikes and anthropogenic mortality. And my references, and thank you very much.
Thank you. Do we have time for a question or two?
No problem.
Okay. Well, the first thing I'd just like to note, I'd like to say that I actually convened this group of panelists ahead of time to drive home some key messages. That was organic in terms of warming, changes to the cold pool, an anomaly year, species shifts to the northeast primarily. I'm planning to eat a lot more black sea bass in New England. I'll do my part there. So that was awesome. That was a great way to set this all up. I want to see if there's one question. I was told we have time for one. Who has a really good question? Are there any online? I don't even know how to look at the ones online. Okay. No good questions. Tony, step up to the microphone.
I'll just speak now. Stuff. I guess I kind of one compound question, because I can't keep it simple. So I feel like we're getting better and better information relative to things. And so my kind of embedded question is this, what I'm hearing is a demand for recognizing, long-term trends are fantastic, but recognizing what are and how to respond to anomalies and share that information with decision makers as a core question. And the other question is, why don't we just have one set of indicators that we all agree are really core to ecosystem health as an outcome? I feel like our indicators are very much driven by our current list of what we have to do, which might not necessarily be the same thing as whether the ecosystem is healthy. So, a compound question.
Sarah, could you hear that question?
I heard the second half of it better than the first half.
I mean,
Why can't we just agree on ecosystem indicators?
yeah, that's good. That's the one I wanted you to hear.
Would you like me to?
Yes, I'll let you go first, then I'll ask Dylan, and then let Glenn wrap up.
Okay, yeah. No, it's an excellent question, and I do think it would be great, I think, if there were sort of a standard set of indicators that everyone agreed measured ecosystem health well. It's just that I think there's different aspects of health that matter to different audiences, and so maybe that is why we're seeing some overlapping indicators and some that are a little bit different. And so for our report, we are really focused on the fishery management councils and what they need for management, and we are responsive to what they want to see in the reports. But I think if there were sort of this universally agreed set of indicators, we would be presenting them. So you can see the common themes, though: temperature, oceanographic features, stock, spatial locations. I mean, I think some of those are there, but if people have suggestions for others, we are willing to hear them. Thanks for the question.
Thank you, Sarah. Dylan, do you have thoughts?
I think a lot of the indicators were pretty similar. I know pretty much every report is going to discuss sea surface temperature, salinity, a lot of the basic physical oceanographic characteristics, chlorophyll levels, and maybe the status of important commercial fisheries. So maybe there's about a dozen that I think most projects are going to have overlapping. Obviously, like I mentioned in my talk, we have 39, so there's going to be a lot of different ones between projects. But I think a lot of the core ones, whether it's the basic physical oceanographic ones, sea surface temperature, chlorophyll, salinity, and then maybe the status of important commercial fisheries, those are going to be overlapping a lot with most projects.
So I think that actually is a deep question. I like Sarah and Dylan's answers to it. And let me just give one specific example. In 2023, the right whale seasonal movement was just very different than expected. And it was because the shelf break jet was carrying this cold water down, and it was in a very thin band, but it was carrying a lot of Calanus finnomarchicus. And so that's one specific species that the right whales really like eating. It was very tied into a narrow oceanographic feature, 10 kilometers wide. And I think this is one of the tough things, is that the organisms are responding on these oceanographic processes that are occurring on scales of literally tens of meters right on up to a few kilometers. And I think that that's a big challenge in terms of larger scale ecosystem indicators there.
Thank you. Thank you for the questions. Thank you for to the panelists. Certainly Marco has had a role for many years in terms of providing information, helping the research community get information to decision makers, and there's a lot more to follow up on here. In terms of this specific symposium, I guess the question to you all as we go forward is, given these changes, what does that mean for protections and conservation of habitat without the ability to predict the future? Am I done? I'm done. We're done. Thank you all. Thank you so much. Thank you, Sarah.
Thanks to the panel. Nick, of course, is typically right, so we're going to move right on to the next panel again. So we do